Has fascism taken root in the United States? Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Democrats win, Republicans lose. It's that simple. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You asked the question, do I think that Trump could be reelected again, given this boondoggle disastrous thing he did last week? And my answer is, hell yes, I think so. And the reason is, to start with, I recommend a book. It's called, a good friend of mine wrote a book called The Hidden History of the War on Voting. If you have a few minutes, you ought to read that sometime. And that's kind of why. I mean, you ought to know better. Donald Trump wasn't elected to begin with. He was installed through a stolen election. And
right, same as George W. Bush.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, I remember we had a discussion, you and I did, before the last election, and you said, I'm scared to death that Donald Trump is going to be president. And I said, Tom, I really do have more faith in this country than that. And I laughed it off. And then when the returns came in, I realized, I've been had. I actually thought that votes were how the elections were decided in this country. I realized right then this was stolen. It was stolen, obviously, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. There were more precincts in those, statistically, completely impossible number of precincts that were decided in Donald Trump's favor that were less than 1%. Michigan, he won by 10,700 votes, supposedly he won, which should have triggered a recount. But because in Michigan there was a Republican administration, governor, attorney general, secretary of state, all those three of those have flipped now. There may be a protection in that regard, but I still think there's going to be. You can see it now. The war on the post office. This is what he's up to. They will stop it at time. The guns that you see in those marches. Fascism has taken a foothold. It's here, and. We're not going to get rid of it. We're not going to get rid of it. We are going to be battling it for decades. It's here. It's taken a foothold. It's supported by Russia. It's already here. One thing I wanted to point out about the post office, since everyone's heard this story, is recognizing what's going on now. But the story, we have to straighten this fact out. The story about it was called the Postal Enhancement and Accountability Act of 2006. This is what the Republicans in the lame duck session before they lost the Congress in the 2006 election passed a bill that was going to force the post office to fund their retirements, something like 75 or 80 years in advance. Right. You've talked about it on this show, and it would have required for the next 10 years that the post office kick in an extra $8 billion. They had to have $80 billion, and this was going to sunset expire in 2016. What happened with that?
I thought it was 5. Huh? You sure it's 8?
It was $8 billion a year.
Okay, I'll try to revise my memory. Okay, cool. Thank you, Paul.
Well, it was supposed to accrue $80 billion. So over 10 years through 2016. And what happened to that was they paid the first installment of the $8 billion, and it really took a hit. And the reason that they did this is because the post office operates on its own, and it's profitable. And they were about ready to convert half of their Jeep fleet, the little Jeeps that drive around, to electric. And the post office, being the largest single customer of fossil fuels, the fossil fuel industry went nuts. And so they had to find a way to hamstring the post office, and so they thought, we'll take that, because they had the money. They were going to do the conversion. They said, no, that money is going to go into a long-term, we'll make you fund your retirements. Well, after the first installment of the first $8 billion, they knew they would sink if they had to do this. This was impossible. So the lawyers for the post office read the bill and said, well, what happens? What's the penalty if we don't pay it? It can't be more than $8 billion. And what they found is that there was no penalty. It was a ruse. There was no penalty for not paying it. So the post office paid the one installment, and then they never paid any more. And now the bill has expired.
Oh, really? I thought they were still. Oh, that's interesting.
No,
Paul, if you
no,
go ahead.
no, they paid the one installment, and then the lawyers for the post office looked at what would be the penalty, and because they were thinking, we'd gladly pay the penalty if it was only, if it was less than so they realized, no, in the bill it says there is no penalty. There is no penalty for non-payment. So they only paid the 1 year, and then they didn't pay anymore. And I went through this. My source on that this was a discussion on the Norman Goldman show a long time ago. So I don't know where the sources are for that, but that's where I got that information.
Yeah, I was going to ask you for that because my memory is that it was $5 billion and that they paid it for a decade. But I've seen so many different stories characterizing it in so many different ways. I'll have to do a deep dive. And if anybody has the details, the very specific details on that,